And discussing this will be Vinod Rai, Rajdeep Sardesai, Sanjaya Baru, and Sashi Kumar.
Thank you. So as was the three panelists, I mean, this is a cliche, but this is a cliche which I think can be stated without any apology here, need no introduction. In the normal course, the person sitting to my right should be doing what I'm doing because he's far more adept at it. But I'll try and see whether I can manage. Because but the problem with questions is then you don't get to hear what he has.
It's also easier to do what I do.
No, not really. And there on the extreme left we have Mr. Vinod Roy, who gave an entirely new meaning to the concept of audit, social audit, political audit in a democracy, and the concept of accountability in a democracy, irrespective of how powerful those who are running things are. And to my immediate left is a very old friend, Dr. Sanjaya Baru, who again is very well known. He has been advising no less than the Prime Minister on matters of the news media and has written about it. All three are incidentally recent authors, who have written about their experiences with what they have been doing, their particular trajectories. And so it's a very unique kind of panel that we have today. And let me begin by saying that the subject that we have for discussion is a bit elusive. It's a bit slippery, if you like. It's called good governance. It's very much in the air. We keep hearing about good governance. We keep hearing about policy paralysis. We say governance is what matters in these elections, or what role governance played in these elections. I don't know how we understand governance when we use this term, or how quantifiable it is, or how measurable it is. So I hope we will, at least towards the end of this, have a better idea of what good governance means. But for the layman, for me, for instance, or layman people like me, good governance or concept of governance took on a new meaning, shall we say, in the last UPA2 government, when there's a saying that which is least governed is best governed took on a new meaning. Because we had least governed, but we were not sure whether it was best governed yet. So, there are a lot of people who probably see that. And now, in the new dispensation, we probably see a tendency for over-governance, for more centralized governance, for zealous governance. So I think we're kind of caught between the two in some sense. So it'll be interesting to see the take on governance that these three persons who have obviously must have given it some thought, serious thought, in the course of their own career, their professional lives, would have given it. So I propose to structure this as follows. We'll have opening comments or statements on the theme by the panelists, then get into a kind of discussion among ourselves on that for a while, and then open it up to the audience, where I hope you will join us with questions or comments as succinctly as possible. Can I ask our illustrious former CAG, Mr. Vinod Roy, to begin and give us an idea about what in his idea is governance and its relevance, particularly to the Indian context, and with the kind of experience he's had dealing with governance and making it something that is out there, which we need to aspire to, which will keep politicians accountable, and so on.
Thank you, Mr. Shikwar. In fact, I'm very grateful to the organizers for having reached out to me. But this morning, sitting there and attending the sessions, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing here? This is lit for life, hopefully literature for life. And an auditor, nobody likes to listen to an auditor, least of all see him sitting on a stage,
One has written a very compelling book, though. So.
Yes. The auditor would have loved to have that last word, but in any case, I have a captive audience, so I might as well make the best of it. Why has governance taken on iconic proportions today? Why? I mean, let's kind of compare it with need for food, hunger. Why do we experience the need for food? Because we experience hunger, a desire for something. Evidently, that particular element is missing in our lives. And why is I mean, governance has been important all through. You hear of Rajas, Maharajas, you hear of any kind of, right from the East India Company, as far as we in India are concerned, to be important to be able to ensure that civil society, the welfare of the people are looked on properly. But I think in later days it has become important because you cannot make economic development sustainable over a long period of time unless you incubate it, nourish it, nurture it in an element of good governance. And good governance is also becoming iconic because governments, I mean, collect money from the people, and there's an element of compulsion when they collect money from the people, and spend that money or spend national resources on behalf of the people. So there's absolutely nothing wrong in the public wanting to know how their monies collected from them have been spent. And that's why I try to console myself in the morning when I said this lit for life could be literature, could be literacy. As a Controller and Auditor General, we tried only to sensitize public opinion, make them literate about what was the efficiency of government's functioning. And I think it's very important for governments to ensure that whatever decisions that they take, whatever decisions that they implement is done in an era of transparency. There is a certain element of accountability to it, and obviously elements of integrity with flawless implementation. So when you talk of minimum governance, there should be a felt need among the public to say, yes, the government is reaching out to us, is sensitive to our requirements, it is participative towards whatever opinions that we give them, and I guess that will ultimately be branded as good governance when the public feels that yes, our needs, our welfare is being taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so that we don't go sequentially, let me now get to the extreme right and ask Rajdeep, what would be his concept of governance, good governance, in the context of India and in all that he's seen over the last decade or so?
Thanks very much, Sashi. Let me also thank the organizers for having us here. Let me concede that I feel completely out of place because, you've got someone who's been an IAS officer and been in government for years. You've got Dr. Baru, who's had the unique advantage of being a journalist who went on the other side and spent time in government. And you've got me who's spent all my life criticizing the government. So
that's the best.
That's the best, yes.
That's the very essence of the media, is to cast a critical gaze on what constitutes governance. My sense is, and I could be wrong, is that increasingly this has become more like a mantra, which is chanted in a manner in the belief, much like, say, 30, 40 years ago, Garibi Hatao was chanted as a mantra. That the belief was that if you say it often enough, there will be enough people out there who will believe that governance, that there is good governance, to the point where even Christmas Day has become Good Governance Day. You've got you're saying it because you know it'll resonate somewhere. It'll resonate in a crowded marketplace. You found a kind of a magical word. My own sense is that it's extremely, as you rightly said, difficult to measure. And frankly, the way I see it from the outside is it means very different things to very different people. So if you go to a business conference, you go to a CII or a FICCI conference, good governance becomes how are you making doing business simpler? How are you bringing in reform as quickly as possible? How are you removing all obstructions for me to be, in a sense, to build a successful business? On the other hand, if you go to a jhuggi jhopdi or a slum colony, the notion of governance is very different. Just having a more habitable environment, or even regularizing my slum colony, which is an unauthorized slum colony, becomes a way for me to believe that the person who's in charge is providing me some element of good governance. And I think the only uniting factor, frankly, between that businessman of CII and the person who lives in the slum colony when it comes to governance is I think that each one of them wants a better life for himself and for his children than perhaps his father had or their parents had. And therefore there is good governance, frankly, in an electoral terms, is an impatience with the existing system. A desire somehow or the other to break the status quo. That if I'm getting power 3 hours a day, I want it now 10 hours a day. If, in a sense, the road outside my house is full of potholes, can it be, in a sense, paved in a manner that the road outside my house is a bit better? Can the sanitation facilities outside in my area be improved? So I think it's very, in a country as vast and diverse as ours, to find some kind of a basis for good governance, particularly from the outside, is extremely difficult. I can see where government is coming from. But those on the outside, frankly, are simply seeing governance as just get on with your job and give me a better life than I have at the moment or than my parents had. And it's as basic as that. I've just been tracking one of these slum colonies in Delhi. And when you look at the conditions in which they are living today, they are subhuman conditions. I mean, Swachh Bharat and these concepts just don't resonate there, because what they are looking, their definition again of a Swachh Bharat is very different from an upper class neighborhood, which will want, trees lined up across the entire neighborhood, the pavements leavened up. In that slum colony, he's just basically hoping that, when he goes to, when they're taking their child to the school, the stench which is there is reduced because you're living next to a garbage dump. Now, he just wants that garbage dump to be removed. The person who removes that, for him, will be seen as someone who epitomizes good governance. So I think measuring good governance is extremely difficult. And it has become, sadly, a bit of a mantra, which is to be chanted, in a sense, to get votes as well.
Right, so it's kind of a catch-all phrase, which is more rhetoric, perhaps, but it's very, very valuable in an electoral situation. Means different things to different people. It's probably there's a tension between doing the right things and doing things right. There's kind of tension between the two there. So let's now look at Sanjaya Baru, who has had the privilege of being at the cusp or at the crossing of the government and politics. In some sense, being in the Prime Minister's office, I'm sure is exposed to both facets of a democracy like India. And how did he see good governance as an issue when he was in the Prime Minister's office? How did it weigh on him? How did it, shall we say, impact or impinge on policy making? Was it a conscious factor? Perhaps you could try and tell us a bit more about this.
Thank you, Sashi. I first would like to begin by thanking Nirmala Lakshman and the organizers of the Hindu Lit Fest for inviting me here. In the last 6 months, I've been invited to many Lit Fests, and I've not gone to all of them because in some senses, these have become a bit of a tamasha and a circus in many parts of the country. Every city now has a Lit Fest. But the reason I'm here today is very special, because the Hindu was the first newspaper that editorially defended my right to write a book. And I want to use this opportunity to thank the editors of the Hindu for that editorial that they wrote in the week after my book was out. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be here. In 1998, I think, or 99, Chandrababu Naidu set up in Andhra Pradesh a Center for Good Governance and invited me to be on the board of that center. So I was a member of the board of governors for about 4 or 5 years. And when I met him first time, I said to him, why have you named this Center for Good Governance? You'll always frustrate people by offering them the promise of good governance. You should have called it Center for Better Governance. Because good governance is an ideal. At any point of time, we'll always be frustrated that we are not the recipients of good governance. But any politician can claim that I've offered you better governance. And people tend to be generous. Yes, compared to 10 years back, compared to 5 years back, are you better off today or not? And I said to him, you got your name wrong. I don't know who advised you. So I actually think good governance is a chimera. You said that yourself, Shashi, and I agree with that. It's a bit of a loose concept. Politicians, if they are clever, are in the business of selling better governance. It's always relative. At the time of voting, the message of a politician is to say, I will do things better than my predecessor. And almost always in this country, particularly in the last couple of decades, we have had anti-incumbency votes, which means people have voted out governments rather than voted in governments. And voting out is always, the message is that we were not happy with what you offered. We are putting our trust in someone else who's willing to offer something better. So it's the pursuit of better governance rather than good governance that actually makes this democracy function. You asked me specifically how the issue would look at from a level of Prime Minister's office. Unfortunately, good governance is not an issue that Prime Ministers actually are concerned about. Because at the end of the day, the kind of things that Rajdeep spoke about, whether it's keeping your neighborhood clean, ensuring drinking water in your tap, or electricity supply, or law and order in your neighborhood, these are all issues that state governments deal with, local governments deal with. It used to be said that in India there are only three important people or three people who matter. It's the PM, CM, and DM, or the district magistrate or district collector, and the chief minister, but most governance is at the local and the state level. What does the prime minister do? I mean, basically, he sits and presides over a cabinet meeting. If there is a war, he is in charge of the campaign, and it's been a long time since we've had a war.
So he's got even less to do, yeah.
At the end of the day, as I've said in my book, prime ministers run foreign policy, essentially. So a lot of their time is taken up by thinking about the world and outside. I mean, you can talk about good governance, but what is it that you can do about it? Apart from giving money to different ministries and saying, okay, I'm giving you this money, now spend it well, whether it's for education or for rural development or for whatever it is. But the guy who spends it, the ministry and the state government and the local government that spend that money are the ones who ensure whether governance is good or not good. Prime ministers do very little about that.
Let me keep you in focus and then put this to both the other experts here. One, I'm at the risk of sounding blunt. The UPA 2 was perhaps seen as a low point of governance, at least in the public perception. This may not be true because they sought to bring in several landmark legislation. Some of them may not have worked because of the peculiar combination, the coalition politics at play then. But nevertheless, it was seen as a kind of a lame duck government, a government where there was no scope for any governance. And from what you say, if the Prime Minister did only these things, one is not surprised that nothing much more than that was happening. Is this, in your opinion, a misperception fueled partly by the media, shall we say, which Rajdeep, shall we say, not that he's of that kind, or was it something which, say, the Auditor General, Mr. Vinod Roy, with his opening Pandora's box of all the, shall we say, irregularities, the audit objections that were raised, which several people think were too proactive and which made it difficult to run the business of government if you kept pointing these things out. Do you think you were caught in these two, between these two issues, or was it really a case of bad performance?
Well, first of all, UPA 2 was a disaster.
So we have a consensus on that. Okay.
And the results of the 2014 election are a testimony to that. As I said, voters often vote against someone, not for someone. And 2014 was also an anti-incumbency vote. It was a rejection of 4 years of misgovernance. But it was also a manifestation of a failure of handling 2 or 3 critical issues. First was the economy, which was not just about growth but also inflation. The second was corruption and response to corruption. I've always argued that it's not the initial crime that pulls politicians down, but the response to that crime. Rajiv Gandhi was defeated not because of Bofors, but because of his response to Bofors. And I think Manmohan Singh lost in 2014 not because of 2G and all the exposés, but because of the government's response to those exposés. There could have been different ways in which, because people in this country have enormous tolerance for corruption. I mean, Tamil Nadu is a good example. You're always voting out somebody who's corrupt, but the replacement is not particularly better. So I don't buy this theory that government was voted out because of corruption exposés. It was voted out because of its incompetent response to those exposés. And finally, I think there was a thirst, not just in India, across many countries we have seen this. In the last 3-4 years, as the world has become more uncertain, particularly after the 2009 financial crisis, there is a global thirst for leadership. The person who manifested this most obviously was Obama when he won the election. Then we've had Putin, then we've had several other leaders around the world who have come through elections where there's a thirst for strong leadership. And I think Narendra Modi understood that, and Manmohan Singh failed to understand that the country wants assertive, strong leadership. So I think for a combination of these factors, UPA 2 proved to be a disaster.
Perhaps Mr. Rai could take it up from here, to reiterate this whole issue that is it the business of a constitutional office of the order that you were heading to be more sensitive to the requirements of a developing society, and when you get so proactive in terms of seeking out irregularities in the system, you have a chilling effect on the system working itself, and many of the, I think, ministers in the UPA have alleged this directly or indirectly, that we can't do anything because there's Vinod Rai breathing down our neck, we can't carry this government forward. How would you respond to that kind of a charge?
Okay, two parts of it. Number one is this, the PM, CM and DM. What are common among these three? All the three of them are captains of a team. They lead. One leads the nation, the other leads the state, and the third leads the district. Now, the buck stops at the table of the leader. Why did the naval chief resign when there were accidents in 2 submarines? He was not the cause of the accidents. He took ownership of it. Why did Shri MS Dhoni quit from tests? He lost 4 of them in a series. He's probably giving way to somebody who was younger and probably more proactive and things like that. But more importantly, as far as the auditor is concerned, it's a simple issue. If the auditor has been proactive, and I ask this of the audience present here today, it's not a question of 1,76,000, the figure. It's not a question of 1,85,000, the figure again. The simple question I'm asking is, when any one of you stand up and say, no wrong was ever committed. That's the point. That in the entire process, is government free to decide whichever way it wants to do and nobody can question? And it was not us going and seeking out these irregularities, it was government inviting us. The government has written letters to us, please, lots of concern is being expressed in Parliament over the spectrum allocations, please look into it. It's the government writing to us that, look, there's been allegations of what is known as gold plating in the oil exploration, please look into it. So it's a felt need of the public saying look into it. And if you have looked into it and you find that something is wrong, I think it's a duty of every constituent inside government to bring it out into public domain. The public deserves to know it. And if anybody believes, as people have said, that all these irregularities coming out into public domain were reasons for a policy paralysis, I think it's a bogey. It's an alibi for non-performance, and Dr. Baru has just confirmed it, saying that it was a disaster. There was no alacrity, no urgency in taking remedial measures, and that's where I think things started going wrong.
Rajdeep, I would like you to comment on both these observations. And since media is a part of democracy, an intrinsic part of democracy, if you say democracy in one breath, one must be able to say a free and open media like we have at the next breath. Doesn't this whole concept of governance extend to the media? Increasingly, I think there are people who are asking, can the media be a kind of runaway, freewheeling exercise, a law unto itself, which is not governed by anybody, not even by itself? So maybe that as well. Would you try and address these issues?
One of the things of this whole UPA2 experiment, which was called a disaster by Dr. Baru, is that the government ceded decision making at times to prime time television. I think far too many ministers in the government, and even perhaps even now, watch what is being said about them on prime time TV. And since more often than not we are noisy, and more often than not, we are posing that the nation wants to know, when the fact is,
That's competition. That's competitive.
No, when the fact is that we don't represent the nation. You see, we believe we represent the nation, but the fact is, there were elements in that UPA2 government who almost got nervous on the basis of what was being said about them on primetime television, and therefore stopped taking decisions, or took, as I say in my book, the most ludicrous decision, or the day the UPA2 government lost, and this is to reflect what governance can mean, is that 4 ministers, including our present President of India, who was then the finance minister, left an editors guild meeting that we were having. Pranab Mukherjee was there at the editors guild speaking to us, and suddenly says he's got an urgent phone call. And we thought something serious has happened because his face had turned red. It turned out that he was going to the airport to receive Baba Ramdev. Now, when 4 ministers go to the airport to receive Baba Ramdev almost as if he's a state guest, because they're so worried that Baba Ramdev is going to come to Delhi and going to stage a dharna on black money, then you start asking yourself whether the media also, in a sense, took over the executive space. The space which should be taken by the executive governance ultimately is the responsibility of the state. The media's responsibility is to hold the government accountable, much as the auditor's responsibility is to ensure that accountability and transparency is ensured. And I think somewhere in the last few years, that balance has shifted. Now my fear is Mr. Modi has gone to the other extreme, where he doesn't want to reveal any information. Yeah. This is a government which hasn't appointed a chief information commissioner for the last 6 months. This is a government at the end of the day which has decided that we will allow the media to come and take selfies with us, but will not answer questions. So, you've almost gone from 2 extremes, from a prime minister who never spoke to a prime minister who's ready to speak all the time, but will take no questions. And as a journalist, my definition of good governance would also include the very notion of accountability, which means that ministers don't give me responses only on Twitter, but give me responses to hard questions that I'm able to ask through RTIs. This government, at the moment, whenever you send them RTI requests, often say, this is, we cannot respond to this. So you've gone from one extreme, where the UPA was terrified of primetime television, to another government which is contemptuous of primetime television. And I sometimes wonder which is worse.
Let me pose this slightly differently. That's a very, very, very interesting. Good governance, it seems, is a relatively new kind of term. Relatively, it's not been in currency so long, and it probably comes, from a corporate kind of genesis. Maybe in the World Bank, IMF, and so on, we talk about good governance. In corporate entities, we talk about good governance. And when we moved into a phase of liberalization and globalization, we started identifying the PMO with the CEO. This whole convergence of a PMO should be like the CEO of a nation, should be efficient, and good governance comes in that sense. So is it a problematic term in our context? And I'm raising this because the political space has been ceded, as you said, in some cases to the media, and some constitutional offices have become strident and powerful, and probably discovering the space there was in the office, and legitimately so. Those who are elected by the people are on the back foot. The institutional mechanisms and the media are I think, very strident and in the forefront. Does this create, this is a devil's advocacy, but does this create a kind of a problem in a democratic setup? Is good governance something that we need to cherish, or should it be representative government, government which reflects the will of the people, or is that a populist kind of concept?
Just a quick point, and this is taking up from what Dr. Baru said, since we are in Chennai. I mean, the general impression when you talk to senior bureaucrats is Tamil Nadu is the best governed state in India. And yet, the perception in the media is it's also one of the most corrupted political leaderships in the country. So I'm just trying to understand the connection between those who, for example, would call DMK Delhi money for Karunanidhi at one level, and at the same time would say that the DMK ran a very, very efficient administration. I remember we were doing a survey and we put Tamil Nadu at number 1, and someone said, you know, you've been bought over by Mr. Karunanidhi. This was a few years ago. And the fact was that on most parameters, Tamil Nadu was number 1. So when you define governance, do you define it also in the context of just pure social and economic parameters? Do you look at corruption as a factor when you sort of determine, is this a state which is well governed? You could have an extremely corrupt political leadership, but the state administration may be very effective in what is seen as governance, because it's such a vague concept.
Also, maybe you have a tradition of a bureaucracy with which all these problems does try to do its best, you know, optimize on the available situation, given the political pressures and so on. But Sanjay, what's your sense of this?
Shashi, that's an important question, and let me try to give you a serious answer. Where does this come from? The idea of good governance. If you go into the literature, it actually comes from the theory that apart from investment, capital, saving, technology, governance is a factor of production. In other words, institutions make a difference. There's a whole literature on the role of institutions, and most recently Fukuyama has written a brilliant book on the importance of institutions in defining the performance of countries. And so, I mean, you're right, it's the World Bank that kind of put good governance in the policy space, which is why Chandrababu Naidu called his center for good governance. If you remember, it was in the context of his going to the World Bank for a structural adjustment loan. But the fact is that the idea that institutions matter is an important idea in the economic literature. And surprisingly, you might be surprised, the guys who have pushed this argument most are the Chinese. Because their argument is that, look, democracy is not important. You ask the question about representative government versus good government. What is the Chinese argument? It's not about representation. It's about institutions. It's about delivery. Efficiency. It's about efficiency, about doing things efficiently, education, healthcare, whatever, power, urbanization, urban sanitation, etc., etc. So the Chinese say, no, we are not a democracy, but we are better governed than so many other countries. Certainly it's better than India. And so the idea of institutions is now very much a part of the thinking about policy. And that is why good governance has become a mantra, as one of you put it.
Do you think that the office of the CAG, you know, I think you probably found the space that you did in it, but is it dependent on the person who's sitting at the helm of affairs? Do you think that it will continue to play the invigilating, the powerful role, the kind of role that gives people sleepless nights in particular sections of, you know, politicians in future, or was it a one-off thing that you were able to do?
Let me put this in perspective. See, good governance is you know, you look at it practically and theoretically both. Some kind of a zero-sum game. You have three elements. You have the legislature, you have the executive, you have the judiciary. If any one of these elements, three institutions, cede space or don't take decisions in time, it's bound to happen that the other one will get into it. Okay? And that's where you had what is otherwise known as maybe media activism, judicial activism. Why did the government have to wait in the coal block licenses and in the telecom licenses for the judiciary to cancel those licenses? If the government had acted in time, appropriately, for whatever decision they could have taken, they could have rubbished the entire thing or whatever, there would have been no need for the judiciary to get into it. But as far as the CAG is concerned, I think institutions today, as Dr. Baru mentioned, are feeling empowerment. and they should feel empowered too, because there has been a huge amount of churning in civil society, and the emerging paradigm has been one in which the citizen today has come center stage and has started asking the right questions, which I think is signs of a society maturing. And if those right questions are going to be asked, irrespective of the person who heads the institution or the Auditor General, the institution has become so empowered that there is a groundswell which will necessarily ensure that there is transparency in the activities of the government.
Right. I'm just going to ask one more question and then open it up to the audience. Rajdeep, you did mention about how the media was actually taking over space ceded willy-nilly by the executive or the legislature. But you didn't really say, is that a good thing or a bad thing? One. Two, when you say good governance, it really narrows down to governing a particular sector of the economy, which is the public sector. Because private sector, good governance is looked after by the CEOs who run those establishments. So you have a kind of a paradox where the public sector is kind of shrinking. You know, the space for the public sector seems to be shrinking, or at least the manifest will of the government seems to be to marginalize the public sector. And we're speaking about good governance in such a big way in India, it must be actually reforming the public sector, good governance in the public sector, better efficiencies in the public sector. So how do you see this paradox playing itself out?
You know, I think at the end of the day, it boils down again to the word that Dr. Baru mentioned, which is delivery systems. Let's be clear. Why is Tamil Nadu seen in a way as a state which is well governed? Or Gujarat? I mean, Gujarat was well governed even before Narendra Modi. On a number of parameters, Gujarat was well ahead of most competing states because A, there were institutions which worked, and B, there were delivery systems. So I think the gap between, you know, the way we perceive notions of good governance and the way the average man sees it as pure delivery. Governments which deliver are seen broadly in very simple terms as good, as well-governed states. It doesn't then matter who the leadership is at times, it doesn't matter who the bureaucrats are at times or the individuals who are certainly manning the place. I think it just matters whether those institutions are delivering. And I think the media tends to focus much too much, in my belief, on the individual and the office to which the individual belongs, rather than look at processes. I think there is very little in the media today that you will see which documents why, for example, why are certain parts of the country facing an agrarian crisis. You will not document it until you have a Sainath who will come and suddenly tell you that there are 2,000 farm deaths in a Vidarbha. We don't wake up to that reality. And I think my worry about this so-called media activism is that the media activism focuses on the 1.76 lakh crore figure. We love the excitement that there are so many zeros. And we will play it out and, sort of use that in a way to push the executive on the defensive or to find one individual whom we can hang. So whether it is a Suresh Kalmadi in the context of the Commonwealth Games or whether it is A. Raja in the context of 2G, it's almost as if we are looking for individuals on whom we can hang a story. And we are not interested in looking at the processes of decision making. We are not interested in how government works anymore. And therefore, I'm not so sure we are being a real watchdog in the truest sense of the word. We have become a kangaroo court. Frankly, we are looking for heroes and villains. So Mr. Vinod Rai becomes the hero and A. Raja becomes the villain. And it's a very convenient binary system that we are able to create without genuinely trying to explore perhaps the manner in which government decisions are taken any longer.
That's very fairly stated. I think, yes, the issue that the media sets the agenda, but does, as Rajdeep seems to suggest, in a blinkered and a narrow focus manner, and that becomes the agenda continuing to be discussed, so you get more and more and more of the same. Without looking at the processes, it's all event-driven. That's a good note, I think, to open this discussion out. The rules of the game, please raise your hand, and he who has the microphone will speak, obviously, but we have time. I think we have about 10 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, for questions. So please keep the questions sharp, succinct, and if it's addressed to any panelist, please state that. If it's a comment, please do make it brief. Please do not give a kind of overview of what's happening in the world today. Thank you.
Basically, don't be Narendra Modi.
question is, at the very beginning of India, there was a question about good governance versus self-government. We thought as soon as we get self-government, we will give good governance. But that has not happened. People did not take what is self-government seriously from the very beginning.
Right.
We have spent now 64 years.
Yeah.
After 64 years, now we are just thinking about good governance. We have to give another 100 years to get good governance.
Thank you. That's an observation. Yes. Yes, sir.
I have a question to Mr. Rajdeep Sardesai. Sir, when we talk about governance lately, it's all about facilitating the corporate. Governance is about scrapping the land acquisition bill, weakening the green tribunal, scrapping the environment law, at the same time cutting the health budget and scrapping the Manrega. So is governments about favoring the haves, by sacrificing the have-nots?
Right.
Short, sharp answer. I think somewhere in your question lies, part of the debate, the heart of the debate, the heart of the dilemma. Environment versus growth is part of this dilemma. At what stage do you accommodate what are seen to be genuine environmental concerns versus this constant desire to achieve higher and higher growth rates? I think Dr. Baru is perhaps far more equipped to answer that, but purely in media terms, I think again we posit it in extremely binary terms. How do we solve this in the media? We get environmental activists on one side and we'll get someone from CIA on the other. And increasingly these debates are becoming contentious and fractious with less and less space, frankly, for dialogue. With the result that even governments find themselves caught in a very polarized atmosphere. And I think it damages governance because it delays decision making. In very simple terms, I believe this entire surround sound which is being created over the kind of debates that you're referring to is delaying decision making in this country.
I think implicit in his question was also whether this rhetoric of governance, good governance, is all about enabling those who are already the well-to-do and, ignoring the deprived, right? Maybe
He's probably talking about some things like crony capitalism or things like that, which kept to be, associated with the governments over the last few years,
right,
where a selected few were getting the benefits of whatever was being given out by government in terms of maybe contracts, in terms of national resources or whatever it was. I think that's what he's referring to. That actually is a fact of lack of good governance, where you cannot transparently, ensure that the activities of government go down well with the people. Why are the people feeling dissatisfied about it? Because your delivery system, your delivery channels, and the models of governance that you're putting out are not satisfactory, don't appear to be satisfactory.
There was a lady who was speaking when I...
Excuse me, sir?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
please go ahead.
Sir, my question is postmortem audit and lengthy legal processes make very redundant...
We can't see you. Where are you?
Because of...
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Is postmortem audit process we are carrying out, and then lengthy legal processes make redundant because of the time losing, people losing faith on any institutions. Whether it is what could be the reason and what would be the possible option to make more accountable the politicians or bureaucracy or anyone.
You're saying the time it takes.
Time takes. Because of the last 18 years taken for a corrupted politician to got in hand, it will become, because people are very, that time they are felt it is wrong. But after some time, the vanishing point of morality and ethics in the mindset of the people.
Right.
Well, I don't want to comment on the judiciary. That's one of the questions that was asked. But as far as audit is concerned, now it's all been telescoped. The report on the Commonwealth Games, for example, came out within 5 months of the Games completing. And CAG's audit is by definition a post facto audit. So it is now being telescoped and is coming out very quickly.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I feel that the man on the spot matters. The man who takes decision, who is bold, is ready to tread a path hitherto untread. He matters and he makes news. That's how even Rajdeep makes a news, along with hundreds of reporters and news anchors. That's how Vinod made a mark because he tread a new path. That's how Sanjaya Baru became the doyen to the eyes of everyone because he had the guts to point out things. Ultimately, it's a man who matters. The process comes next. Even our Puranas speak to Rama as an ideal, not the dharmic way of life which he read. For that, we need examples, human examples like Vinod, Baru, and even Sanjaya.
Thank you. That's an observation.
Okay, this is for Rajdeep. Everyone talks of the 1.76 crores on the spectrum, but on the CAG report on Air India, it was pointed out that it was Praful Patel who messed it up. And in spite of that, you find that, and the man who is responsible for killing aviation in India is Gopinath with Air Deccan. But media gives so much importance to him. Why do you all do that?
Media gives so much of?
Importance to Gopinath, he says.
Gopinath and
who ruined
Praful
the
Patel.
aviation industry.
Let's be honest, the CAG report on Air India is one of those where you must also ask parliamentarians. Parliamentarians tend to be softer towards certain politicians than they are to others. I've often said this controversially, that A. Raja was, relatively speaking, a soft target compared to Praful Patel, because Praful Patel had more friends across the political class. So therefore, if you see the parliament debate, I don't even think there was a proper debate in parliament on the CAG report on Air India. So it just depends on the kind of politician you also are and your ability. And the media also tends to see certain politicians. Perhaps we tend to be a little bit more aggressive towards certain politicians than we are to others. I think Air India is a good example of a CAG report that simply didn't resonate in the manner that the 2G report did.
There was a mention of Tamil Nadu. I just wanted to make a comment that governance in Tamil Nadu is considered to be best, and we have been part of it. And it is because it has been always bureaucracy driven and never politically driven. Just wanted to say that.
I think that's what we said. That was Mrs. Gariali, who has had a long innings as a bureaucrat in Tamil Nadu.
I had a question.
But I think she has a valid point, yes.
Is there any link between abolition of planning commission and good governance?
Would you like to, Sanjay, since you're an economist, a media man, and a media advisor, you're best equipped to handle that.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that question. Look, the Planning Commission was renamed, essentially, and redefined. It's not been abolished. The name has been changed. It is now called Niti Ayog, and its role has been redefined. What it's going to do has been redefined. But the Planning Commission has not been directly involved in the business of governance. It's a policy body. It has an indirect influence on governance in the sense it has decided, it has in the past had a role in deciding allocation of funds across programs. But it's never been an institution of governance as such.
Yes, the gentleman here, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
My question is to Rajdeep. When do you think good governance will come to media? And and supplementary to that is, how do you think corporate ownership affect governance in media?
Might I add, Rajdeep, that in the media, it does seem to apply that it's least governed and therefore you assume it's best governed. Yeah, is that true?
The second part of your question on corporate governance, on corporate ownership of the media cost me my last job. So I don't think I should be answering too much more beyond that. But I think the first part, I mean, I am an advocate today for some form of a regulator for the media. The problem in India is the moment you say regulator, the question is, can you ensure it's an independent regulator? Yeah. Yeah. That's the challenge. I mean, Prasar Bharati was designed as was to be an independent public service broadcaster. It really hasn't been that. So I would support the idea of a better governed media, possibly through some kind of external or self-regulation, but some kind of a self-regulatory mechanism. But how are you going to ensure its independence? Because for us in the media, self-regulation means basically for the other channel, the other newspaper, not for yourself. Everyone else has to be governed. So I am a great supporter of the idea of regulation.
Do you say that, like Justice Kadju, that self-regulation is an oxymoron? You can't regulate yourself.
No, I'm calling for a two-tier process. Have a self-regulatory mechanism within your newsroom, but you do need, whether it's like the Press Commission in Britain or whether it's like Ofcom in Britain, some other body which is truly independent, which can regulate the way we function. Because frankly, we've lost our moral compass.
No, I'd like to come in on this, because this has been a subject close to my heart for almost more than a decade. We saw for the first time questions about governance in the media coming up in the early 2000s. The financial media was subject to a lot of questioning by SEBI. I remember meetings of editors of financial newspapers and television channels where SEBI came forward saying we will have code of conduct for journalists. And we in the media said SEBI cannot import a code of conduct. We are an independent, we are a democracy. The media will have its own code of conduct. But not everybody in the media today has actually a financial code of conduct for journalists. Then Kadju is only recent, but long before Kadju, it was SEBI under G.N. Bajpai that came forward with this. I have repeatedly said in our own media discussions in the past that this issue will come up. It has come up in many situations, but not as sharply as it has come up in the context of the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. But the media has to someday reckon with this issue of good governance, of accountability, of editorial leadership and editorial accountability. The number of newspapers that do not have editors in this country, the number of TV channels where there is no editorial control on what happens. The media today is in a governance crisis, and it is not adequately recognized within the profession. I mean, Rajdeep has been, as president of the Editors Guild, tried very hard, but you're knocking against a huge ocean of misgovernance if you look at what's happening in the Indian media today.
Good evening, sir. Sir, actually now I am 25-year-old. I am working in a PSU. Now I can feed my parents and my wife and children. But all are telling India is growing up, growing up, growing up. But when it will be floor growing? Till now, after independence 68 years, still now it is growing up. But when it will be
When will it be grown, fully grown, yeah. When will India be fully grown? He's always been told India is growing up, growing up, growing up. But he doesn't see it. Any takers for that question?
Sir, excuse me, sir.
I think no one really knows the answer. Yes, go ahead, please.
Sir, I think in the course of this discussion, you came up with a new phrase, which is better governance. And I just get the feeling that this is a little convenient and easy to keep, because assume a fourth standard guy saying that last year मैं 32 marks लाया था maths में, इस बार 36 लाऊंगा. So this is better marks. So don't you think this is very, very easy? And the second thing is, the second question that I had is, I think as a government, we've now learned to have a well-marketed government. Like the BJP reached out to the best ad agency, Ogilvy and Mehta, and they came up with a sweet rhyme, Ab ki baar Modi Sarkar. And it worked, right? But here they could go to Ogilvy and Mehta. But to learn good governance, where do they walk up to? Do they go to the President of India, or where do they go?
Who is the question to? Rajdeep, right?
No. Anyone of you.
Dr. Baru used the term better governance.
Oh yes, better, yes. That's too far, yes. Look, the panelists are already wilting before the questions. You know?
Aiming for 36 next year, if you got 32 this year, is not particularly a great thing to aim for in life. I mean, you got 32% this year, try to get first class next year. That is better performance, right? Not going from 32 to 36. But in the field of politics, there are no absolutes. People do not vote for absolutes. They vote it's always a relative judgment, because what you're offered limited options. When you go to cast your ballot, you're not voting for the person that you really want to win that election. You're voting for within the options available. And those options are limited, right? So given those limited options, the decision is always a relative decision, never an absolute decision. That's what I meant.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there in terms of questions from the floor. It's been a very invigorating discussion. We've had such perspectives as we can only get them from a panel of this order. Let me leave by striking a kind of, shall we say, doing my bit for the cause of the media. I think we are agreed that we need self-regulation in the media, but I think one has to be wary about any external regulation in the media, because as Sanjay said, executive, legislature, judiciary in the media, it's true that the executive, legislature and the judiciary are accountable to the people directly or at one remove, because if you don't like someone, you can vote him out. Even a judge can be impeached with 2/3 majority in parliament and so on. It's only the fourth estate or the fourth pillar that's not so accountable. But I would propose that indeed that's the way it should be, because if it is made accountable in that sense, it is one of the three other estates which will have to supervise that accountability. And then is it a free media anymore? So I think this is the conundrum, this is the paradox. Therefore the media must of course put itself in the dock, and the self-regulation aspect therefore comes in very strongly there. On that note, thank you very much for being here and for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you very much.